Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Daniel. I am the owner and founder of the Raminfard School of Arts. And for those of you new to the channel, I'd like to welcome you. And for those of you who have been following me, thank you. I'm very excited to show you the next video, which is on the figure. And this video is intended as an introduction into basic form. In one video, I already introduced you to the idea of moving from point to point and just using clean, sharp lines without any curvature. Now we're actually adding in curvature. So we are going to be putting together the form at a very rudimentary level. I have no intent of getting into detail or anatomy here. This is just a short 15-20 minute video. And I want to just give you guys something tangible to use, especially using the measurement of the head and using all of the different techniques that are described here in this particular video to make it as easy as possible for you to approach the figure. For today's episode, it's going to be on the female figure. I will do a male figure as well, so that's coming up. But I'm super excited to share this stuff with you. I want you guys to practice as much as you can, watch it over and over again, and feel free to ask me anything that you'd like in the comments, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Please like, subscribe, and share. We'd love for us to grow so that we can do more and more of these videos, and I'm just gonna let it rip. All right, so we are approaching the figure. And the way that I start off almost every figure is to draw the head first. And the reason why is because the head is going to be a standard for the rest of the body. So if I don't get that right, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. So that's one of the first things that I really look at. I usually don't go into the level of detail that I'm going in now, but I just want this drawing to look a little more like the model than I would normally draw it, which is just a simple, really simple shape. It just helps me to identify, okay, roughly here's where the eyes are, here's where the brow is, so on and so forth. But by no means is that required. Just a simple oval will do. But you want to make sure that that looks right. So I'm actually taking my time to just get basic shape of the head, basic shape of the hair, and then I'm going to actually measure out how many times that head fits into the body. So having drawn the head, I can now take an actual measurement, and what I'm noticing here is that there's 8 heads that fit into the body head to toe. So I'm counting her particular figure as being 8 heads tall. That's not always the case. It's going to be 7, 7.5, 8. Sometimes somebody who's really short might be even as short as 6.5 I've seen. But in general, I tend to elongate the body just because I think it looks pretty that way. And I go with what's known as the superhero model, which is 8 heads tall. And it really helps me organize my my big shapes that I'm working here. Now, what I've done is at mark 4, so 4 heads down, I've indicated where I see the pubic bone, and this is the crotch. This is really the bottom part of the torso. So I'm indicating that, and I'm lining it up against the ear. That's where I see it. And I'm going to draw a simple triangle to indicate that space right there. Then I'm going to look for the angle of the shoulders. So I'm going from one side to the other. I draw it first as a straight line, and then measuring off of the head as a simple line going across, I'm going to indicate where the ends of the shoulders really are. So I look very carefully for that. Then I'll curve things out, and now I'm actually going to make this connection between the center of the neck rolling into the center of the crotch. That curve is really important, and now I can pull the line of the shoulder right into the crotch. So this is something that I've used for a long time. This is a Riley method technique. It's not 100% true to Riley, but it is a technique used by Riley. And the next thing that I'm going to indicate here is the belly button. Right above the belly button, I notice, is really where the start of the hips are. And I'm looking very carefully at the angles. So you'll notice that I'm not getting exact shapes, but just getting shapes that represent
the basic form of the figure, because for the scope of a drawing like this is really just a sketch. I'm not going to do any shading. I'm not going to do any detailing. I'm just looking for basic shapes here. So these are the core shapes that I look for whenever I'm drawing any figure, especially one that's standing. So that Star of David type shape, I'm just getting that in. And now I'm looking for angles along the pubic area rolling up into the hips. And as I draw that out, I'm going to actually start to draw in a square-like, box-like shape, which are the hips. Now, this is something that a lot of people are confused by. The hips basically make a box. For males, it's going to be much smaller. For females, it's going to be much wider. But we're looking for that box shape. Having done the initial start of that, I think it's a good time to jump over and start to indicate where the breasts are. And I think of the breast as basically like a shelf that's sitting on the figure. So I start with the initial indication of where the nipples are, because that's usually where the form turns. So I start that, and that's what that first line is. Then the second line underneath is where the breasts actually end. And I draw them first as one shape, and then I'll break them up. So I'm thinking in terms of large masses. So I'm putting this all together as one shape and then breaking it down. And the reason why I'm thinking in terms of large masses is because you always want to manage your large shapes first and then break them down into smaller shapes. You'll see this concept, as I've mentioned before, over and over again in my videos. The next thing that I'm actually doing is indicating where the nipples are. And guys, I'm sorry that I had to censor this, but this is YouTube and I want it to be a safe video. So I do apologize for the censoring. I think for educational purposes, nudity is perfectly fine, but I understand that some people are very sensitive to this. So coming in on the other side of the hips, I am curving the line just a little bit. And now that I have that, I'm actually going to move up into the chest and draw something that basically represents the barrel of the lungs. So the rib cage, essentially. And that subtle curve that goes around through the neck and down into where the ribs are is often very helpful for me to just make sure that things are lining up. Especially around the armpits, I get a good idea of where that actually lands. I'm doing a subtle curve to indicate basically where the torso ends and where the legs and arms start. So that's how I'm getting that form. I'm looking very carefully to just make sure that some of the initial lines that I have in make sense. Again, I'm not looking to make this perfect. I could spend hours perfecting the torso before I jump into the legs and the arms. But for now, I'm just trying to get a rough read of this thing. The actual draw time was about 30 minutes. And you don't want to spend more than that when you're first learning to draw the figure. You actually want to do as many short poses as possible. And what I mean by short poses are 5 and 10 minute poses. You're just trying to get basic information down on paper and just get a read for where things land. That's the most important thing. So you'll notice I've already put down a foot. Why would I do that before getting in the legs? Well, it's because that foot is really where the body's weight is on, and I need to know where that actually lands underneath her chin in order for me to get the rest of the body lined up correctly. So I get that foot in so that I have a landing point, and I also do that with the knee as well. So the knee is going to come in pretty shortly, but getting that foot really tells me where my lines are headed. So I recommend that technique, especially since I've already indicated that she's going to be 8 heads tall. So we've got the pop of the hip coming out. This is the lower part of the hip. And then I'm looking to see, okay, so the back of the knee, where that lines up. And like my previous video on the figure, I'm using a technique of line extension. Basically, I look for where the lines go. Where do they land? So this video is definitely sped up, so it's hard to see the time that I'm taking, but I take a lot of time just looking to see roughly where things land. So I'm coming in, I'm looking very, very carefully. Okay, how many heads down does the knee live? And then as I draw in the knee, I'm just getting a rough shape for it. The knee is very complicated, and you want to spend some time really just studying that, as well as the foot, as well as the hand, as well as the head. I mean, every part of the anatomy really should be drawn separately. But for the purposes of something like this, I'm just going to essentially draw a triangular shape and call it a day, because that's really what it boils down to. Now that I've gotten some sense of what the knee looks like, I get in the lower part of the leg, dropping into the foot that I've already drawn, and I'm just trying to tighten that up and make sure that that looks realistic, or at least looks something like a foot. Initially, you're supposed to draw something that's shoe-like, that outlines the foot, and then you're supposed to bring in all of the smaller shapes. Now, before I get into the other leg, there is a reason why I'm jumping up top into the arms. It's because that I want my drawing to come together cohesively. If I focus too much on just one part, then I'm going to lose my balance. So I'm jumping back up here just to make sure that all of this stuff works before I complete the leg. It's not necessarily a rule per se, but it's just a way in which I draw so that I'm making sure that all parts of the drawing are getting an even amount of attention, and that they are working out. I think one of the key things that I want you guys to notice is that I'm not killing myself to get exact shapes, especially with the figure, especially in the beginning. All I'm trying to do is just get some rough shapes that look similar to the shapes that I'm looking for, and trying to manage them as best as I can. Ultimately, all drawing and painting is shape management. I'll say that again. All drawing and painting is shape management. Do I have the right shape? Do I have the right value? Do I have the right edges of that shape? Is the placement of that shape right? Does it need to be bigger? Does it need to be smaller? Does it need to be moved to the left? Does it need to be moved to the right? So on and so forth. All we are truly doing is managing shapes. And the better you are at managing those shapes, the better your skills are. The rest is just your level of imagination and what you want out of your own art. So before I get into that other hand, I'm actually going to drop back down and indicate where the knee is. And again, a simple line extension to see what the angle is and where the knee roughly lands. It's not an exact position, but it's pretty close, so it's acceptable to me, and I'm just going to keep on going. And again, the purposes of this is really just to give you an introduction to some really basic, simple shapes of one of the ways that I draw the figure. If I was to actually draw this thing as a serious drawing, like a commission or something that I really wanted to hang on the wall, this would be probably a 3 to 4 hour video. I would really take my time with everything. I think what I want to express here in this video is just basic key concepts here, basic shapes, basic concepts, because that's the foundation. You really don't want to get hung up on the details. In fact, I would say that one of the number one mistakes that intermediate artists make is that they get too caught up in the details way too early. In the beginning, you want to really slow down and not rush. That's the rule for the beginners, and now the rule for intermediate artists is stop focusing so much on details. It's about a cohesive idea and concept that you're putting down on paper. Now, one of the things I notice is that the space between the legs, if you look at that as a negative space, doesn't quite look right. It's close, but it doesn't quite look right. Knee might need to be just a little bit higher, and the overall shape might need to be a little bit tighter. So that negative space is not actually working for me. But I'm so close with the majority of these shapes that I'm just going to leave it alone for now. This kind of drawing is what you want to do over and over and over again. And yes, it's good to notice these subtle differences in form and shape, especially around negative space. But like I am saying, we're just trying to get general form in. We can always make adjustments later. I think one of the most paralyzing things is to be too perfectionistic about your shapes and then you just stop or quit. So my hand looks long. I'm going to shorten this. I'm going to redraw the shape, and it's great that you guys get to see this. So I'm not happy with that shape, and I'm just going to literally erase out. Never leave something consciously wrong with your drawing. That's not a good idea. If you see something that's wrong, definitely get that fixed. The question is whether it's worth the effort and worth the change. In my opinion, with something as important as the placement of the hand, this is something that you definitely want to adjust. So the last thing that I'm going to do is actually review the drawing and really look to see what else do I need to refine and adjust. So I'm looking carefully. That's why you're seeing a little bit of a pause between my final lines. Once I feel like everything is lined up well and the majority of my shapes look good, that's it for me. I'm going to move on to my next drawing. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Happy drawing, everyone.